All right, let's talk about what makes you. Well, you. We're about to dive deep and decode the biological blueprint that's been passed down for generations. This is all about heredity, the fundamental set of rules that governs everything from the color of your eyes to the way you laugh. Let's get into it.
Have you ever looked in the mirror and just seen it? You've got your dad's nose maybe, but your mom's eyes. So why is that? Why aren't you a perfect carbon copy of just one of your parents? Well, it's not random. Turns out, it's a beautiful and really intricate dance of genetics. The answer to that question comes down to one word: heredity. It's the process of passing traits from one generation to the next. You can think of your DNA as the roots of this massive family tree, containing an ancestral code that connects you directly to your parents, your grandparents, and way, way beyond. Now, here's a really important distinction to make. There are two kinds of traits. First, you've got your inherited traits, the stuff that's passed down in your genes, like your eye color or your blood type. That's baked into your code. Then you have acquired traits. These are things you develop during your life, like building muscle at the gym or getting a scar. And here's the key: acquired traits are not passed on. So no matter how ripped a bodybuilder gets, their kids don't just pop out with huge biceps. That's not how it works.
So, if this blueprint exists, where is it? Where is all this information actually stored? To find out, we have to go on a bit of a journey. We need to shrink down, way, way down, and zoom right into the code of life to find the actual hardware of heredity. So, let's start big picture. The human body. It's this incredible complex machine made of literally trillions of individual cells. But the real secrets, the master instructions we're after, aren't on the surface. We've got to go deeper.
Okay, let's pick one of those cells and zoom right in. See that little central part? That's the nucleus, the cell's command center. And inside that, we find these cool X-shaped structures called chromosomes. Think of them like tiny biological filing cabinets, keeping all our genetic data neatly organized.
So what happens if we pull one of those filing cabinets open and start unwinding what's inside? Well, we find this: the legendary double helix. This is DNA. This is it, the source code, the master thread that contains every single instruction needed to build and operate, well, you. It's the ultimate instruction manual. So if DNA is the entire instruction manual, a gene is like one specific recipe in that book. It's just a segment of DNA that codes for a single trait, like the recipe for eye color or the recipe for hair texture. And get this, humans have around 20,000 of these recipes that define who we are.
All right, time for some quick but super important genetic math. Most of the cells in your body are diploid, which just means they have a full set of 46 chromosomes, 23 from your mom and 23 from your dad. But your sex cells, the sperm and egg, are special. They're haploid, meaning they only carry half a set, just 23 chromosomes. And this is the whole key, because when a sperm with 23 meets an egg with 23, you get a brand new cell with a complete set of 46, ready to build a whole new person. Okay, so we've seen the hardware, the DNA, the genes, the chromosomes. But how does the code actually work? Now we need to look at the software, the rules of the system that decide which of those genetic instructions actually get used. For every gene, you actually get two versions, one from each parent. And these different versions of the same gene are called alleles. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine a gene is a famous song. The alleles are like different cover versions of that song. You get one cover from your dad and one from your mom.
This brings us to a really key distinction. Your genotype is your underlying genetic code, all those alleles you're carrying around. Think of it like the part of an iceberg that's hidden under the water. Your phenotype is the result you can actually see, the observable trait like blue eyes or tallness. That's the tip of the iceberg. The hidden genotype creates the visible phenotype.
So how does the genotype build the phenotype? Well, it often comes down to a power struggle between dominant and recessive alleles. A dominant allele, which we show with a capital letter, will always express its trait if it's present. A recessive allele, with the lowercase letter, only gets to show itself if there isn't a dominant one there to overpower it.
You know, for most of human history, these rules were a complete mystery. That is, until a monk named Gregor Mendel started messing around in his garden. He's the guy who finally cracked the code, and believe it or not, he did it using simple pea plants.
So why pea plants? Honestly, it was a stroke of genius. They grow fast, they produce tons of offspring so you get good data, and most importantly, they have very distinct either-or traits. A plant was either tall or short. Its seeds were either round or wrinkled.
There was no messy in-between, and that clarity is what allowed him to spot the patterns. So, here was his first big experiment. He took a purebred tall plant and crossed it with a purebred short one. And what happened? Every single one of the offspring was tall. It was weird. The short trait had seemingly just vanished into thin air. Where did it go? This is where the magic happens. Mendel then took those new tall offspring and crossed them with each other. And look, the short trait reappeared. It hadn't vanished at all. It was just hiding. And what's more, it reappeared in a surprisingly predictable way.
And what was that pattern? This, a perfect 3-to-1 ratio. For every 3 tall plants that grew, there was exactly 1 short plant. This wasn't just a fluke, this was a rule, a fundamental law of nature, hiding in plain sight in a garden.
This 3-to-1 ratio is what allowed Mendel to figure out his first 2 laws. First, the law of dominance. The tall trait was masking, or dominating, the short one in that first generation. And second, the law of segregation. Each parent plant only passes down one of its 2 alleles for a trait, which then recombine in the offspring.
Now, these rules don't just apply to peas. They apply to us. So let's take what we just learned from Mendel's garden and see how it works when determining one of our own most fundamental traits.
Let's look at the 23rd pair of our chromosomes. These are our sex chromosomes. In females, you see 2 large matching X chromosomes. In males, it's 1 X and 1 much smaller Y chromosome. This simple difference is the genetic switch that determines biological sex. And here's how that plays out. A mother has 2 X chromosomes, so all of her eggs will carry an X. A father, however, has both an X and a Y, so he produces 2 kinds of sperm, half carry an X and half carry a Y. This means the sex of a child is determined exclusively by which type of sperm from the father fertilizes the egg. If an X sperm gets there, the baby is XX, a girl. If a Y sperm wins, it's XY, a boy. A 50-50 probability every single time. So let's recap the blueprint real quick. Our DNA holds the master code, and genes are the specific instructions. In the battle of alleles, dominant traits can hide recessive ones. We saw how the sex of a child is determined by whether the father's sperm carries an X or a Y. And this whole elegant system is what connects every single one of us to our family, our ancestors, and our shared human history. I'll leave you with this final thought. Heredity is this incredible mechanism that links us to everyone who came before us, passing down a legacy written in our very cells. But it's the slight changes in that code, the variation from one generation to the next, that allows us to adapt and prepares us for whatever the future might hold.